In the middle of that chaos stood one man whose name still carries weight in the streets, Richard Convertible Burt Simmons. To some people, he was a legend. To others, he was a dangerous kingpin who helped turn Miami into one of the drug capitals of America. But no matter how you look at it, Bert's story is one of power, betrayal, survival, and a lifestyle so wild that even Hollywood struggled to capture it. If you're already locked in, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. You're about to hear a story most people don't break down like this. Back in the 1970s and 1980s, Miami was exploding with money from the cocaine trade. Drugs were flooding into South Florida from Colombia faster than law enforcement could stop it. Entire neighborhoods were changing overnight. Young men who once struggled to survive were suddenly driving expensive cars, wearing gold chains, and carrying enough cash to buy homes outright. But behind the flashy lifestyle was something much darker. Murders became common. Shootouts happened in broad daylight. Fear spread through the city like a disease. And right in the middle of that storm was Convertible Burt. The nickname alone made people curious. Some said he got the name because he loved flashy convertible cars. Others believed it represented the way he moved. Smooth, flashy, and impossible to pin down. Either way, the name stuck, and soon everybody in Miami knew who he was. But Bert didn't start at the top. Like many street legends, he came from rough beginnings. Miami during that time wasn't the glamorous city tourists see today. Certain neighborhoods were filled with poverty, crime, and limited opportunities. Young men growing up in those areas saw the drug game as one of the only ways to escape struggle. Fast money became more attractive than slow suffering. Bert understood that early. What separated him from many others wasn't just courage, it was intelligence. A lot of people in the streets reacted emotionally. Bert reportedly moved differently. He studied people. He understood loyalty, fear, and business. He knew the drug trade wasn't just about violence, it was about control. The men who lasted the longest were usually the ones who stayed calm, while everybody else lost control. As cocaine money exploded across Miami, Bert began building connections. And in the drug world, connections meant everything. It wasn't enough to be tough. You had to know suppliers, distributors, corrupt people willing to look the other way, and soldiers ready to protect the operation. One weak link could destroy everything, and that's exactly what made the streets so dangerous. Everybody wanted power, but nobody trusted anybody. That's the part people often leave out when talking about drug kingpins. The money looked glamorous on the outside, but the paranoia never stopped. Friends could become informants. Business partners could turn into enemies overnight. One wrong conversation could get somebody killed. In that world, survival depended on staying 2 steps ahead. Convertible Burt earned a reputation as somebody who understood the game better than most. People feared him, but many also respected him. In neighborhoods where poverty was normal, successful drug dealers were often viewed differently than outsiders imagined. Some saw them as providers. Others saw them as symbols of escape. Young kids looked at luxury cars and stacks of money and believed they were looking at success. But the reality behind that image was much uglier. Miami during the cocaine era became a war zone. Bodies were showing up everywhere. Rival crews fought for territory and money. Law enforcement agencies were overwhelmed. Newspapers across America began calling Miami one of the most dangerous cities in the country. Violence became so common that many residents almost became numb to it. Still, Bert continued rising. What made his story different from many other street figures was his larger-than-life reputation. People spoke about him almost like a movie character. Stories spread through neighborhoods about his money, his cars, his confidence, and the dangerous people connected to him. Some stories were true. Others were exaggerated by the streets. But that's how legends are created. Once fear and mystery mix together, the truth becomes hard to separate from myth. And there was another twist most people didn't realize. Many of the biggest drug figures during that era weren't operating alone. The cocaine business in Miami connected local street figures to international organizations moving millions of dollars worth of narcotics. What looked like neighborhood hustling on the surface was often tied to a much larger machine involving cartels, smugglers, corrupt networks, and organized crime. That meant the stakes were even higher. When millions of dollars are involved, betrayal becomes almost guaranteed. Some people close to Bert reportedly turned against him over time. That's another ugly reality about the drug game. Loyalty often lasts only as long as the money does. The same people eating at your table today may secretly be planning your downfall tomorrow. Fear makes people selfish. Prison makes people desperate. And greed makes people dangerous. That constant pressure destroys many men mentally before the streets destroy them physically. But Convertible Burt survived longer than many expected. Part of the reason his name still carries weight is because so many people from that era never made it out alive. Miami's cocaine wars left behind a trail of funerals, prison sentences, and broken families. Entire communities suffered while a few individuals became rich. The streets celebrated the fast life, but mothers buried sons at alarming rates. That contradiction sits at the center of Bert's story. On one hand, people admired the image of power. On the other hand, the violence connected to that world created lasting damage that many neighborhoods are still recovering from today. And yet, despite all the danger, the streets continued producing new hustlers, chasing the same dream. Why? Because poverty makes risk feel normal. When people feel trapped, they often become willing to gamble everything for a chance at success. Drug kingpins like Convertible Burt became symbols of that gamble. To struggling young men, he represented escape. He represented power in a world where many people felt powerless. But power in the streets always comes with a price. The higher somebody climbs, the bigger the target on their back becomes. Law enforcement eventually increased pressure on Miami's drug world as the violence became impossible to ignore. Federal agencies launched investigations. Informants started cooperating. Politicians demanded crackdowns. The same flashy lifestyle that once made drug dealers celebrities began attracting unwanted attention. And once the government locks onto somebody, staying free becomes much harder. One of the biggest myths about kingpins is the idea that they live peacefully forever. In reality, most endings are tragic. Prison, death, betrayal, addiction, isolation. Very few escape clean. The streets may reward people quickly, but they usually collect payment later. Convertible Burt's story became part of a much bigger chapter in American crime history. The cocaine era changed Miami forever. It influenced music, movies, fashion, and street culture across the country. Films like Scarface helped create a larger-than-life image of drug kingpins. But many people who actually lived through that era say the truth was even crazier than fiction. Real lives were destroyed. Real blood was spilled. Real communities suffered. And yet people remain fascinated by these stories decades later. Part of that fascination comes from the mystery. Men like Bert operated in shadows. The streets passed down stories like folklore. Every neighborhood had its own version of events. Some saw him as ruthless. Others saw him as smart. Some respected him deeply. Others feared him completely. That mix of fear and admiration is what creates underworld legends. But here's the part many people don't talk about enough. Most street legends pay for their lifestyle in ways the public never sees. The stress alone can destroy a person. Imagine constantly worrying about enemies, informants, police investigations, betrayals, robberies, and assassination attempts. Imagine never fully trusting the people around you. Imagine looking over your shoulder every day, knowing one mistake could end everything. That's not freedom. That's survival mode. And many former hustlers who lived through that era eventually admitted the money wasn't worth the paranoia. Still, the image remains powerful because humans are naturally drawn to stories about rebellion, power, and danger. That's why names like Convertible Burt continue surviving through documentaries, interviews, street stories, and online discussions. People want to understand how these men rose to power and why so many others followed them. The answer usually comes back to the same things: money, fear, opportunity, and environment. Miami, during the cocaine boom, became the perfect storm for all four. The city's location made it a gateway for drugs entering America. Weak enforcement during the early years allowed operations to grow quickly. Massive profits attracted ambitious criminals. Poverty created endless recruits. And once violence entered the equation, fear helped maintain control. Convertible Burt became one of the names forever connected to that era, not because he was the only kingpin, but because his reputation captured the energy of the time: flashy, dangerous, unpredictable, and larger than life. Today, younger generations hear these stories almost like urban legends. But for many older Miami residents, this wasn't entertainment. It was reality. They remember the helicopters, the shootings, the funerals, and the fear. They remember a city transformed by drug money almost overnight. And they remember the names that ruled the streets. Convertible Burt remains one of those names. His story is a reminder that power gained through fear often creates destruction far beyond the people directly involved. The money may come fast. The reputation may feel untouchable. But street empires rarely last forever. Eventually, every king faces pressure from rivals, law enforcement, betrayal, or time itself. That's the cycle the streets repeat over and over. And maybe that's why people still talk about Convertible Burt decades later. His story represents more than one man. It represents an entire era in Miami history. An era built on cocaine, ambition, violence, and survival. An era where legends were created in the shadows and where many never escaped alive. But even after all these years, the story of Richard Convertible Burt Simmons still sparks debate. Some people view him as a street mastermind who understood survival better than most. Others see him as part of a violent era that nearly destroyed entire communities in Miami. And honestly, both sides tell part of the truth. That's what makes stories like this so powerful. The streets are never completely black and white. Many of the men who became famous in the drug game came from neighborhoods where opportunity was limited from the beginning. Some grew up watching poverty, addiction, violence, and broken systems all around them. For young kids living in those environments, the hustlers often looked like the only people winning. They had the cars, the jewelry, the women, and the respect. Meanwhile, regular workers were struggling just to pay bills. That image influenced an entire generation. Young men started believing the streets were the fastest route to power. But what they didn't always see were the hidden consequences behind that lifestyle. They didn't see the paranoia. They didn't see the sleepless nights. They didn't see the fear of betrayal from friends or the constant pressure from law enforcement. And they definitely didn't see the emotional damage that came with living in survival mode every single day. That's one of the biggest lessons hidden inside Convertible Burt's story. The streets may give you money fast, but they usually take peace away even faster. And during Miami's cocaine era, peace was almost impossible to find. The violence became so extreme that it changed how America viewed Miami forever. Tourists were afraid to visit certain areas. News stations constantly reported murders and drug raids. Federal agencies flooded the city trying to stop the bloodshed. What started as underground hustling eventually became an international crisis connected to cartels, organized crime, and billions of dollars moving through the shadows. Yet somehow, figures like Bert still became larger than life. Part of that came from the culture surrounding the streets. In many neighborhoods, surviving danger earned respect. Remaining calm under pressure earned respect. Building wealth in impossible situations earned respect. Even enemies sometimes respected people who managed to stay standing during one of the deadliest periods in Miami history. That's why old school street figures still speak about that era with a mix of fear and admiration, because very few people truly understand how dangerous those times really were. Every day could become your last. Every deal carried risk. Every conversation could be a setup. And every new person around you could secretly be working for somebody else. That level of pressure changes people permanently. Some become colder. Some become paranoid. Some lose the ability to trust anyone at all. And for many men in the drug world, the lifestyle that once felt exciting eventually became a prison without bars. That's another reason these stories continue attracting attention decades later. People aren't just fascinated by the money or violence. They're fascinated by the psychology of survival. They want to understand how somebody rises from the streets to become feared across an entire city. They want to know what kind of mindset it takes to operate in a world filled with betrayal, greed, and danger. Convertible Burt became one of the names forever tied to that mindset, not just because of the rumors or street stories surrounding him, but because he represented an era when Miami was changing faster than anyone could control. Cocaine money reshaped neighborhoods, influenced politics, corrupted systems, and created underworld legends whose names still echo today. But in the end, every street empire eventually fades. The flashy cars disappear, the money gets spent, the crews break apart, and the legends become stories passed down to the next generation. Some stories become warnings, others become myths, but all of them leave scars behind, and maybe that's the real truth behind the rise of Convertible Burt. Not just the power he had, but the price that came with it. Miami legend Richard Convertible Burt Simmons was released from federal prison around 2018. The former drug kingpin served approximately 23 years of a 26-year sentence for charges related to the drug trade. Following his release, he has actively worked to steer youth away from crime, including his involvement in the Miami Kingpins docuseries. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps push the video more into the algorithm and helps the channel continue bringing you powerful true crime stories like this one. Also, drop a comment below and let us know which underworld legend or street figure you want us to cover next. And make sure you check out the merch in the description. Watch the video below for more true crime videos and untold stories from the streets.